Agent Prerogative, written by author G.K.Parks. Narrated by Amber Hinson. Original music created by Andre E. Leodore 3000. Modified by Amber Hinson. 1. Stepping off the plane, I resisted the urge to kiss the tarmac like the Pope. Instead, I squinted against the too bright sun, thankful to be on solid ground. The flight from Paris back to the United States had been long and crowded. There must have been at least 4 infants on the plane who screamed in chorus for the last 3 hours. My head pounded. My stomach was unsettled, and I just wanted to go home.
Parker!
A voice called from behind as I moved with the rest of the deplaning herd.
Parker!
I sighed and stopped walking.
Alexis?
My supervisor, Mark Jablonski, tried again. I waited for him to catch up. He met me in his wrinkled suit, looking about as haggard as I felt.
This is a joke, right?
He held up his cell phone. Of course not. What were you doing for the last 8 hours? I asked as we continued through customs, flashing our passports and federal agent credentials. It would make picking up our firearms seem less suspicious to the overzealous TSA agents.
Sleeping?
Mark looked incredulous.
I can't believe you spent the flight writing your report on our joint task force. Just because we've spent the last few months in Paris working with Interpol to bring down an art forgery ring doesn't mean you have to hit the ground running as soon as we land. Wouldn't you like a break?
I'd love one, Jablonski. We made it to the luggage carousel, and I grabbed my suitcase and overstuffed duffel. That's precisely why I spent the last few hours getting my paperwork in order. I had sat in my cramped seat with my laptop resting on my thighs as I rehashed everything the director would need for our debrief. All the while, Mark snored in his seat 2 rows behind me. My role as special agent with the Office of International Operations required an extended overseas investigation as we assisted Interpol in identifying art forgers in Paris, worked in concert with their undercover operative, Jean-Pierre Dubois, and arrested 7 different smugglers, all of which were being prosecuted in the EU before any charges would be brought against them in the US. Proof of my dedication could be found in the first-degree burns on my thighs from my overheated laptop. Now that I was home, I wanted to go home and not back to the office.
You know, we still have to go through the unofficial debrief before we can call it a day,
Jablonski warned as he led me from the airport and into the parking structure. When we left for Paris, he had driven the 2 of us in his government-provided SUV. Therefore, I had no choice in the matter since my car was still at the office, and I was under orders, given that Mark was my supervisor. Yes, but after that, I can go home. I smiled. I don't have to spend the next few hours writing my report. It's finished. I tried to hide the smug look, but failed miserably. That's why you got the email notification on your phone.
Damn overachiever.
He shook his head. Face it, I'm a genius. He snorted and unlocked the doors so I could throw my belongings into the trunk and get inside the vehicle. And the answer is no. I'm not helping you catch up on paperwork, I declared.
Stop being so insubordinate, rookie,
he teased as we headed for the freeway.
Your 2 years aren't up yet. I still own your ass.
Mark and I had a good relationship. It started out a little rocky, but he was a great mentor and an even better friend. I was 26, and Mark had at least 2 decades on me. Sometimes, I was convinced he thought of me as a daughter. In the 22 months that I had gotten to know him, he finalized his 3rd divorce and seemed as disconnected from the rest of the human race as I was. He had some friends, but no spouse or children of his own. I had always been a loner with no family, few friends, and my career being my sole focus in life. Needless to say, we clicked. All new recruits at the Office of International Operations, which was part of the FBI, had to undergo 20 weeks of training at Quantico, followed by 2 years of supervision by an actual agent. Jablonski must have hit the jackpot when he was assigned me. In the last 2 years, I had filed more paperwork than I thought possible, gone undercover to find an arms dealer, and most recently, I had spent the last few months in Paris stopping art forgers. It was a hell of a life. We drove back to the OIO in silence, and I appreciated it. The pounding in my head had subsided to a dull ache, and the queasiness had abated. The only trick would be to get my internal clock back on East Coast time. When the SUV came to a full stop in the underground garage, I took my bags out of the trunk and found my car keys. Unlocking my car, I put everything in the back seat, hoping to make an even faster escape as soon as possible.
"I'll meet you upstairs in the conference room,"
Mark called as he went to the elevator. Taking a deep breath, I wanted to hug my car. I was home. Sure, Europe was great, but there was something to be said about being home. My car, my apartment, my furniture, and my bed. My pillow. Grinning like an idiot, I went to the elevator and rode up to the OIO floor. "Excuse me," I said to a man's back, "but that's my desk." "I know." Michael Carver, my rival from Quantico and my support on the arms dealer case, spun around in my chair. "Welcome home, Alex." "You're supposed to be in Los Angeles. You work out of the LA field office. The jet lag must be causing hallucinations. I got transferred 6 weeks ago. Agent Sam Boyle and I are the newest additions to the OIO family." He winked. "It's because the director was so impressed by the awesome job the two of us did last time." If I remembered correctly, Carver had almost gotten himself killed, and Boyle and Jablonski had been chewed out for letting 2 probationary agents call the shots. But I didn't quibble over details. The goal was to be debriefed and go home. Whatever. I opened my desk drawer and grabbed a notepad and pen. "But this is my desk." "Come on, Alex. Don't you know how to share?" "Nope." I tried to hide my smile. "It is nice to see you again, Michael." I walked away before he could come up with a cheeky response. After going over the information regarding the arrests, our time in Paris, and anything else the powers that be deemed pertinent, I found my way back to the parking garage. Jablonski was upstairs, typing his report, and we were both scheduled tomorrow afternoon for the much more official debrief and meeting with the Interpol liaison. Right now, I just wanted to go home and crash. Even though it was around 5, my body was on Paris time, and I was convinced it was getting close to bedtime. Letting myself into my apartment, I found the place covered in a layer of dust. The air smelled stale, and the room was stuffy. I cracked open the fire escape, changed the thermostat, and ordered a pizza. While I waited for dinner to arrive, hoping it would be 20 minutes or less as promised, I changed the sheets on my bed, pulled out some clean towels, and unpacked my luggage. After eating, I took a shower and went to bed before 8. I woke up at 4 a.m. and cursed my screwed-up sleep schedule. Having nothing better to do, I spent the rest of the night cleaning my apartment, writing out a grocery list, and running on the treadmill. By 8 a.m., I was ready to go back to work. When I arrived at the OIO building, Jablonski wasn't in yet, and I got reacquainted with my coworkers and friends. A dozen open cases needed attention. As I perused the folders, it felt like I was starting over. Being gone for an extended amount of time must have that effect. It's not like time stood still while I was away. Once again, I was behind. "Playing catch-up?" Michael asked from his desk, diagonally across the room from mine. "Sucks," I retorted. "Did you leave all of this for me yesterday? Or were you trying to figure out where I keep the good pens?" "The good pens are in the top right drawer," he teased. "And I thought you'd want everything waiting when you got back. You're like a damn robot. Predictable as hell." Letting the comment go, I glowered at the files as I began making personal notes on the current open cases. "If you want, we can get together this weekend, and I'll catch you up to speed." Judging by his expression, I wondered if he was being sincere. "Dobbs did the same for me. I'm just paying it forward." "Thanks." "Don't mention it." 2. After our meetings and conferences, The file on Paris was closed and no longer our concern. It was nice to be back in familiar territory, where English was the only language spoken. Settling behind my desk with a soup cup filled with coffee, I read my emails, office memoranda, statements that had been passed along by Homeland Security, and began again on the stack of files. It was Thursday, and although I was trying to adjust, the trip had left me exhausted and overwhelmed.
You know, you could call in sick tomorrow,
Carver suggested, jerking his chin at my blank notepad. I'm not sick. Jablonski came down the hall and went into his office. He nodded to Michael. If my boss could do it, so could I. It's just one more day, and then I'm off this weekend. Or so I hoped.
Maybe you need to change your batteries, or plug into the wall, or whatever it is robots do,
he quipped. I gave him a death stare, and he went about his business. The rest of the day, and the next, moved at a snail's pace. Or at least I did. Friday at 4, I called it quits and went home. Curling up on the couch, I didn't move unless it became absolutely necessary. Saturday afternoon, there was annoying knocking at my door. And without looking, I knew it was Michael. He had a messenger bag slung across his chest, a 6-pack of beer in one hand, and a plastic bag with the logo from the deli down the street.
I've come prepared for everything,
he announced, entering my apartment.
And I do mean everything.
The innuendo was not lost on me, but I chose to ignore it. Michael was a bit of a flirt, and sometimes it was hard to tell when the teasing stopped and the serious began. My general approach was to take everything non-work related as a joke.
Was I wrong to assume your fridge is empty?
Not at all. I grabbed the bag from his hand and poked my head inside as I carried it to the coffee table. But I would have ordered in. He shrugged and put the beer in the fridge before coming back into the living room with all the necessary work documentation still inside his bag.
It was on my way.
He took a seat on the floor and began pulling out stacks of paper as I evaluated the sandwiches and got up to get some plates and flatware.
This feels like déjà vu,
he surmised. Are you here for good? I put a paper plate and napkin in front of him. Grabbing a turkey and cheddar sandwich, I struggled with the incorrigible plastic wrap as Michael watched.
It looks that way. Afraid I'm moving in on your territory and going to outperform you? Again?
Ha! I met his eyes. But I thought you liked it in L.A.
The OIO might be a better fit. Now, do you want to catch up with me or with the paperwork? Because frankly, I'm good with either.
Maybe a bit of both. Carver spent hours going over leads and the current circumstances surrounding a dozen cases that made their way to our office. He didn't complain once, despite the constant questions I posed. It had grown dark outside, and my notes were plentiful. Everything that I could glean from the files was instilled within my being. Anything else I should know could be picked up from investigating or observing.
You think you have it all down?
He asked, packing everything back into his bag. Yes. Thank you.
Well, the way I remember it, I owe you. This probably doesn't quite make up for that, but it's a start.
I shook my head. You don't owe me. Let's not talk about that. I didn't get fired. You didn't get killed. It's all good. He looked a little grim. What's it like working in my neck of the woods? I rerouted the conversation to something more pleasant.
Pretty good. If you and Jablonski weren't shipped off to Paris, I might still be in L.A. So if things go south, it's your fault.
He looked mischievous.
Want to grab dinner and tell me about your trip?
Okay. I changed out of my tank top and sweats and into something more appropriate and treated Carver to dinner. It was the least I could do. We ate and talked while we sat at a back booth in the neighborhood sports bar. It was Saturday, so with the exception of some college sports fans, the bar was rather subdued. Afterward, he walked me home and collected his belongings. Although I'd never admit this to him, I was glad to have another familiar face at the office. It was also nice not being the only probationary agent. Someone else could be picked on and forced to do the menial tasks and the shitty assignments. Several weeks later, I was no longer a probationary agent. After the official paperwork was forwarded to the pertinent parties, and I had some options concerning transferring to a different office, Jablonski took me out to dinner. Apparently, the rest of the team had been invited. Seeing as how Carver and I graduated Quantico together and were both active agents now, everyone wanted an excuse to celebrate on the government's dime.
Welcome to being full-fledged members of the team.
Sam Boyle, Carver's supervisor, toasted. If Mark told me this was a social outing, I would have declined. Crowds and parties weren't my scene, and the dozen members of the OIO present counted as a party in my mind.
Any idea where you might want to go from here?
I glanced up, wondering what Michael would say. He shrugged and picked up his bourbon. Maybe I could learn a few tricks on keeping my mouth shut from him.
Parker?
Mark commanded my attention.
Are you planning to stick around?
That depends on how many more overseas assignments you want to drop in my lap, I retorted, and he chuckled. Are you counting the days until you're rid of me? There was the briefest flicker of emotion across Mark's face before he said,
I'm counting the days until you stop being a huge pain in my ass.
In that case, I'm not going anywhere. Someone's got to keep you in line.
Watch it. I'm still your boss.
The conversation found a focus, which was no longer me, and I stared into nothingness as I considered what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. This was the first time I felt like I belonged. The first place I had an apartment and a real home with people I cared about, even if they were just curmudgeonly federal agents. Leaving it to start over somewhere else seemed counterproductive. Maybe I just hated change. Tomorrow, I'd ask Mark if there was a permanent position for me at the OIO or if a transfer was necessary. But tonight, I was determined to celebrate. An hour later, the chorus of cell phones began with Jablonski and ended with Carver. There had been a development on a major case, so we were all summoned back to work. Boyle glanced at Carver, who by all accounts had one too many to go back to work. The problem with being in law enforcement? You were always on call. That meant being drunk was never allowed, but something that happened all too frequently.
Parker,
Boyle directed his comment to me.
Why don't you and Carver take the rest of the night off? You've earned it.
He didn't want to point out Carver's condition to the rest of the table.
Just make sure to show up first thing in the morning, and we'll get you up to speed.
Aye, sir. Mark paid the check as the rest of the group left.
Congratulations. Again,
he whispered, putting his jacket on.
I'll see you first thing in the morning.
Absolutely. I paused. Sir. He hated it when I called him that. Narrowing his eyes, he headed out the door as Michael and I stared at the empty table and the remainder of the bottle of champagne. What the hell? I picked up the bottle and refilled my glass, and then poured the last few drops into his. Agent Parker? He held up his glass, smiling like a kid in a candy store. Agent Carver. I grinned. Tomorrow would be business as usual. But tonight, I didn't see any reason to let perfectly good champagne go to waste. 3. The next morning, I was happy to report I wasn't hungover. Carver didn't appear to be either, but maybe he found an EMT to hook him up to a banana bag between then and now. He was pretty wasted last night when I shoved him into a cab and gave the driver his address. Luckily, he pulled it together and showed up looking professional and ready to work. Last night, a tip came in on an impending robbery. One of our cases, which we had made little headway on, involved a string of robberies. Most of them involved liquor and grocery stores. But each time, the ATM was the focus of the theft. Since ATMs were considered bank property, which fell under the jurisdiction of the federal government, we were assisting the FBI in tracking the robbers. While dozens of anonymous tips flooded the hotline over the last 2 weeks, none had shown any promise. An individual caller last week had given a location, and believing it to be a hoax, we didn't do anything to safeguard against the robbery. Last night, confirmation came in on the tip. The thieves were escalating, and our tipster had provided additional details. naming future locations including a bank. We pulled phone records, but the call originated from one of the city's few remaining payphones. Nearby CCTV footage was being compiled to see if we could identify the tipster based on timestamp. Once that was accomplished, facial recognition would run non-stop until we put a name to a face. Honestly, I was glad I wasn't here last night, examining the call logs. Every once in a while, the job was more tedious than fulfilling.
In my office.
Jablonski barked the moment I left the conference room. I followed him down the hall and shut the door as instructed.
Are you ready for your first assignment?
I'm pretty sure we've been there, done that.
True, but you're not wet behind the ears anymore. Until we identify our tipster and find out how he knows what's about to happen. The director wants to place an agent inside the bank. The bank manager has agreed, and given the demographic of employees, you fit the bill.
Why? Because I can count without using my fingers?
Wow, you're just full of positive attributes.
He outmatched my sarcasm.
Most of the bank tellers are women. Early 20s. Either starting a career or working while continuing their education. If we send you inside, no one will be suspicious.
Because I don't look like a federal agent? This was a sexist world we lived in.
That, and because you got caught it last night at dinner. The waiter wasn't even sure you were 20-1.
He needed glasses, and he's 5 years too late for that. I didn't want to be insubordinate. Fine. Point me in the right direction, and I'll assist on all your banking needs.
Excellent.
Mark led me down the hallway and into another conference room where a few seasoned agents counseled me on the proper methods for blending in and keeping an eye out for suspicious behavior. Around lunchtime, I met with Mr. Brandon Sharp, the bank manager of Mutual One. He ushered me into his office and told his assistant not to bother us while he conducted the interview. After we finished, he gave me a tour and announced he'd call in the next few days to let me know if I got the job. I was positive I was a shoo-in. When I arrived back at the OIO building, the techs were still trying to pinpoint the source of the tip. They had yet to find a usable angle from the city's surveillance cameras. The two other locations our tipster mentioned were being scouted. One was an ATM on the street that was going to be monitored by a 24-hour surveillance van, and a tactical team would remain on standby. The second location was a convenience store with an in-store ATM. Agent Boyle was being sent inside to work the counter and keep an eye out. At least I wasn't the only one getting an undercover assignment. Who knows? Maybe before I started my bank job, the thieves would be arrested.
How come you get to play dress-up?
Carver asked. He approached my desk and looked over my shoulder as I reread the robbery reports, the FBI's memos, and what the OIO compiled on its own. It's because my legs look great in a skirt.
Okay.
He didn't know if I was kidding or serious. That made two of us.
Boyle wanted to know when you are starting at the bank.
2 days from now. I start training Thursday morning. I shut the file. There was nothing else to learn. At least working as a bank teller didn't require an elaborate, planted background. I'll finish learning the ropes by end of business Friday, and by Monday, I'll be stationed at the front counter.
Where's the bank's ATM?
Front foyer as soon as you walk inside. I bit my lip, recalling the single bank security guard who had been chatting up one of the loan officers. The guy was probably 60, not necessarily the best theft deterrent. There's going to be a team nearby. If the thieves make a run at the ATM, I'll radio it in, and by the time they think they're getting away scot-free, Tactical will be pointing assault rifles in their faces. Should be simple.
Assuming you noticed them jacking the machine,
Carver retorted.
You might be bogged down counting some old lady's pennies.
I can multitask.
Great,
Jablonski said from behind.
Then you can go over the bank security systems while you brief your backup unit.
Right away, sir, I said to annoy Mark as I grabbed the relevant folder. Glaring at Carver for getting me in trouble, I brushed past him and into one of the conference rooms. By Monday morning, the techs had given up trying to identify the tipster. There weren't any good angles to locate him, and even when they tried to follow him from the phone booth, He looked and dressed in such a nondescript fashion that they lost him in a throng of people. Boyle was positioned at the convenience store, but aside from some punks who were more interested in stealing beer than cash, there hadn't been a blip from any of the 3 locations. The tipster hadn't called since, so without even a peep, we had no new developments or leads. My heels clacked against the tile floor as I entered the bank in a mid-length skirt, a cute blouse, and my long brown hair flowing behind me. I didn't look like a federal agent. One of my coworkers offered a smile as I reached across and lifted the latch to get behind the front counter. Mr. Sharp came out of his office to welcome his newest employee.
Alex, welcome to the Mutual One family.
He gushed. I hoped he acted like this with everyone, and not just me, or else he'd blow my cover within my first 10 minutes on the job. Thank you, sir. I logged into the computer with my bank-provided access code. I'm ready to get to work. He nodded, understanding the double meaning, and went back to his office. As customers filtered in, I scoped out the layout in between entering deposits and handing out cash for withdrawals. The entrance and exit were separate doors directly in front of me. The ATM was positioned between the 2 doors, against the wall. The left side of the room was comprised of loan offices, 3 separate cubicles, and a small waiting area with a couple of couches, a few tables, and a television. The right side contained a file room and Mr. Sharp's office with a door to the vault and safe deposit boxes that were nestled on the main floor, but walled in so as not to be seen by your average customer. Upstairs contained more offices for other people with titles, 2 bathrooms, a break room, and a corridor that led down a back staircase to the vault and safe deposit boxes. Around lunchtime, the pace picked up as more customers entered the bank. I tried to pay attention to the employees to see if anyone seemed off, but there was too much of a rush to focus on anything other than work. It was 2 o'clock by the time the clientele trickled to a stop. With the obvious lull, I was told to go on break. I went upstairs, did a thorough assessment of the restroom and break room, and returned to my post at the front counter. As I sat on the stool behind the counter, I spotted Jablonski waiting for a loan officer. He stretched and caught my eye, but did nothing obvious to comprise my position. Either he was checking up on me, or there had been a new development. 4. At 5 o'clock, the security guard locked the front doors. The tellers performed a final count of the money in the drawers, put the cash into zippered envelopes, and brought them to the smaller bank safe to wait for the morning. Wishing everyone a good night, I went outside and walked the 2 blocks to my car. Shutting my door, I put the key in the ignition and started the engine before dialing Mark's number.
It's about damn time,
he said.
The ATM got hit early this morning.
What do you mean it got hit?
Our robbers waited for rush hour traffic, attached a chain to the contraption, and drove off before our agents could intervene.
Shit! My mind tried to process an appropriate plan of action while I exited the garage and turned down the next street. It looked like another late night would be spent in the OIO building. What about a description of the vehicle? Did they get tag numbers?
We got the car. It's a rental. Wiped clean. Forensics is going over it. They haven't found any prints. We checked everything, even the lever to adjust the seat. We're pretty sure it's at least a 3-man team. From eyewitness accounts, 2 men got out and hooked some chains to the ATM, and another drove the getaway vehicle.
ATMs have cameras.
They wore masks. Our IT team is trying to come up with a possible solution. But as I was saying, we have the vehicle. Hell, we even have the ATM. The only thing we don't have is the money. Treasury Department's putting us in contact with an expert on ATM thefts to give us a usable timetable and evaluate the evidence. He should be calling in a few minutes. Are you on your way?
Of course. It sounded like our robbers had seen one too many movies. This was real life. You couldn't just haul off an ATM and believe you would get away with it. That was highway robbery. My internal voice made the pun, and even I cringed at the pathetic attempt at humor. What about Boyle's location?
Nothing yet. We've doubled up surveillance. If these assholes show up, we'll nab them.
The sound of metal on metal filled the airspace. Mark needed to oil that filing cabinet.
When you get here, come to my office. We need to devise a better plan for protecting the bank.
I knocked on Jablonski's open office door, and he glanced up. Clearly, someone wasn't having a good day. He blew out a breath and rubbed his forehead. He motioned that I remain silent. He was on speaker with someone important from the Treasury Department. After a couple,
"Yes, sirs,"
and
"We'll do our best, sirs,"
he hung up. "Are we having fun yet?" I asked, trying to hide the smirk. His glare quickly squelched my playful attitude.
"We're a group of incompetent imbeciles. Or so say the higher-ups."
He looked ready to explode as he tried to tamp down his rage.
"Assuming our tipster is on the level, we're going to do all we can to grab the guys at the convenience store. Until then, we have nothing. It's bad business, hoping for another crime to be committed."
What did the expert say?
20 minutes to get into the ATM. They dragged it off, took it to a secluded location, emptied it, and left the car and the machine behind.
He slammed his palm on top of the desk.
"Fuck!"
"What do you want me to do?" He looked up as if he forgot we were having a conversation. Maybe the stress was leading to premature senility.
"Don't let anything happen at the bank. We're keeping the team outside, and hopefully we'll stop them before they do any more damage."
I nodded.
"Does anyone you work with seem suspicious?"
"No, but I've barely spent any time with these people."
"You have amazing instincts, Parker."
He frowned, considering something.
"I trust your judgment. Off the record, has anyone set your radar buzzing?"
I shook my head.
"Let me know if they do."
"Absolutely."
"All right. Go home. There's nothing for you to do here. I've turned another group of IT guys onto the tipster's phone message, and forensics is still evaluating the car. When something surfaces, I'll let you know."
The rest of the week, I evaluated each of the Mutual One employees. No one seemed involved. Frankly, unless one of them was the tipster, they all had alibis for the latest ATM theft. This was a small branch of a neighborhood bank. This wasn't some giant national savings and loan. Most of the customers had been coming here for years, or were new additions to the community. The tellers knew them by name, and no one seemed out of place. At the same time, no one seemed too comfortable or familiar with the layout either. Jablonski was barking up the wrong tree. After spending the day undercover as a bank teller, I went to work at the OIO. Our floor looked like a ghost town, and a sick feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. Yes, it was Friday, but something was off. I dialed Carver's cell phone. Hopefully, he would insist I had gone insane.
"Parker, I can't talk right now. The convenience store just got knocked over."
"Is Boyle okay? Did we get the guys? What about an ID?"
"Sam's fine. If you're at the office, you might as well stay there. We'll bring the party to you."
He hung up without another word. Damn it. Things were not going the way they were supposed to. Maybe we were all incompetent imbeciles. I reviewed the alleged progress we made on the vehicle and the recovered ATM, but realistically, there was no progress. No prints, no leads, nothing helpful. We were chasing ghosts, and it didn't look like they could be caught. 2 hours later, Carver, Jablonski, and a team of agents came in. Mark shut himself inside his office, slamming the door for effect. Carver said something to the rest of the suits with him, and they scattered. He grabbed a chair and pulled it up to my desk. I raised an eyebrow and waited for him to say something.
"It's a 4-man team. 3 men, 1 woman. She was a decoy. She goes in, starts asking a dozen questions about lottery tickets, and while she's there, 2 guys go to the ATM. Dark jackets with the collars turned up and baseball caps low on their faces. Oil notices them, goes around the counter, and the chick clocks him with a glass bottle. By the time he recovers, the guys are gone."
Shit.
The car they were driving had no plates. It was a black sedan, older, maybe from the 90s. Our surveillance team was in hot pursuit for almost 2 miles, and then they vanished.
How the fuck did they vanish?
I wished I had a door to slam in frustration.
Don't know.
He rubbed his eyes.
The good news is, they didn't get anything from the ATM, and Sam's working with a sketch artist to get a composite of the woman out over the wire.
Where is he?
I glanced around the office.
Emergency room. They wanted to make sure he didn't have a concussion. We have the security camera footage from inside, and outside the convenience store.
He continued.
Frankly, it's just a matter of time.
Great. What are we doing until then?
Jablonski's on the line with the director, and someone from the FBI. We need a foolproof plan to stop these assholes. They didn't get anything today, but we didn't get them either.
Let me rephrase. What are we doing in the meantime? Carver wasn't assigned to the surveillance vans, and since I was only working the bank, we were free to do whatever needed to be done on the investigation.
Dial up the security cam footage, and I'll go make some popcorn.
5. Carver and I spent the evening watching and rewatching the footage. He noted a few details about the car they drove and the fundamental stats for the men involved: height, weight, and race. I noticed a reflection in the glass on the counter, and after sending it down to the IT department, we had a reasonable representation of the woman's profile. When Agent Sam Boyle returned to the OIO with his clean bill of health and a couple of stitches, he verified that's what she looked like. Between the profile reflection and the rendition the sketch artist made, we issued a bolo on her and ran it through the news channels. Maybe we'd get lucky. It was after midnight when Jablonski left his office. He didn't say a word, and given the fact he was lugging a stack of files around, I suspected he had an early morning meeting with someone at a different agency concerning our current failure. This was, by all accounts, the FBI's operation. But since we were part of their organization, we were helping, or trying not to impede the investigation. At this point, our usefulness was somewhat questionable. "They're lucky," I said, breaking the silence. Carver and Boyle both turned to look at me. "It's not that we're screwing up, and it's certainly not because they're better than us. They've been lucky up until this point, but it won't last." Something scratched at the corners of my subconscious. The tipster has to be on the team, or someone close to one of the thieves. It's the only way he'd know what's going on, and it would explain why he's gone to such extremes to conceal his identity from us.
But why would someone involved in the thefts report himself?
Carver asked.
"Maybe to taunt us. Maybe as a game to prove he's better,"
Boyle said.
"Or because he doesn't want to be doing this. But he isn't sure how to get out of the mess he's in."
We need to find the girl. I picked up the sketch and looked at her picture. She's the best lead we have right now. Boyle was kicking himself for letting her get the drop on him. He had been duped by a pretty face. It was a stupid mistake. Unfortunately, we were all human. Mistakes did happen, even if they weren't supposed to.
"Go home, Sam,"
Carver said.
"Alex and I will run through this a few more times. You've had a rough day."
Boyle nodded and collected his things. "Sir," I called after him, "you prevented them from getting the money."
"Yeah. Too bad I didn't stop them from leaving."
"We'll get them. It's just a matter of time."
After the elevator doors closed around Boyle, Carver whispered to me.
"Do you think we will get them?"
"It depends. If they're smart, they'll stop now and go into hiding. But if they were smart, they wouldn't be robbing ATMs, and one of their own wouldn't have called in a tip."
"So it's just a matter of time?"
I shrugged. "Probably." The two of us spent the next couple of hours reviewing the reports from the forensics lab, our tech support, and the agents in the surveillance van. The only thing we needed was a lead on the robbers' identities, or whereabouts. Carver remained at his desk, searching the vehicle database in the hopes the make, model, and dents and dings on the car would lend themselves to tracking the owner. I stayed at my desk, trying to correlate the tipster footage to the two thieves inside the convenience store. The tipster could be one of the thieves. But then again, the tipster could also be any Joe Schmo off the street. I despised endless possibilities. At 3 a.m., my computer let out a resounding ding. Facial recognition had gotten a hit on the woman who assaulted Boyle. Not only did we have a name and her previous arrest record, but we also had a current address. "Do you want to knock on some doors?" I called to Carver. He answered my question with a bright smile. After the proper paperwork was signed, an entire assault team accompanied us to Roxy Henderson's apartment. No wonder the woman had a record. With a name like that, she was just a stone's throw away from stripper or prostitute. The team flanked the front and rear exits. We didn't know who might be inside. Carver knocked on the door as I stood to the side of the frame with a group of well-armed men behind me.
"Ms. Henderson, open up."
We listened for noise coming from inside.
"Federal agents. Miss Henderson, open up."
After a minute passed without any sound or movement, Carver stepped back and reached for his gun as one of the tactical team approached the door with a battering ram. After one good swing, the door popped open. The frame splintered where the deadbolt had been. The tactical team went in with guns poised, and Michael and I brought up the rear. A chorus of clears echoed through the living room, kitchen, and bathroom. Michael and I found Roxy passed out in bed with a needle in her arm.
"That's one way to spend the stolen cash."
Carver radioed for EMTs and checked her vitals.
"She's breathing. No sign of an overdose."
He lifted her eyelid and checked her pupil. She mumbled something, but didn't move. I glanced at the paraphernalia littering her dresser. Heroin?
"That would be my guess."
He stepped out of the room, and I followed. On the bright side, she didn't make a run for it.
I doubt she even realizes anyone is inside her apartment, including herself. "Can someone take a look at this?"
One of the tactical guys called from the kitchen. Michael and I exchanged a look. It would have been childish to play a game of Rochambeau to decide who was going into the kitchen and who had to babysit the drug-addled thief. So instead, I strode to the kitchen without giving Michael a chance to protest. The refrigerator was open, and for all intents and purposes, I was willing to accept that our team found it that way. Inside were stacks of cash, schematics on 4 different models of ATM machines, maps listing the locations of the hits, and a set of blueprints. No one touched anything, but I crouched down to get a better look. This was a lot more than we bargained for, but there was no reason to look a gift horse in the mouth. Something did seem strange, though. "Any sign of anyone else living here?" I asked. I got a couple of headshakes. "How about signs of recent visitors?" This time, I got a shrug. "All right, we need an evidence team down here." One of the men radioed it in, and another went downstairs to wait for the EMTs to arrive. Carver, I headed into the hallway. "Does anything about this situation seem strange to you?" He kept one eye on our unconscious prisoner.
"Like what?"
The house was neat and tidy. "I'm not sure."
"Did you find any evidence of substance abuse anywhere else?"
Carver asked as I wandered through the living room. None. Nothing about her apartment, the building, or the neighborhood screamed addict. The walls were covered with photographs of her friends and family. She didn't look the type. Even stoned out of her mind, she still didn't resemble an addict. There was no liquor, wine, or even beer in her fridge. No empty bottles in the trash. Not even a cigarette lighter to be found anywhere else in her apartment.
"You think someone did this to her?"
Michael reached the conclusion I did. Maybe. Or maybe she's got a type A personality and likes to keep the dirty little secrets hidden away, so no one will suspect her world is anything other than perfect.
"Damn, you are cold and cynical."
Eventually, the EMTs showed up and checked her vitals. She roused slightly as they put her on top of a stretcher and carried her down the stairs. She was going to the hospital and getting handcuffed to the bed. At least we found one of the thieves. 3 more to go.
Maybe we could get her to talk. The doctors could evaluate her for other drugs, check for track marks, and since she was a captive audience, we'd have the opportunity to get some real answers.
6.
Welcome back, Ms. Henderson,
Carver said.
I believe your luck might have run out.
She looked utterly bewildered. Her eyes searched the room, trying to determine where she was and what was going on. She jerked her arm and realized she was restrained. You're in the hospital, I said. Do you remember what happened? She shifted her gaze to me, surprised anyone else was nearby. Frankly, I didn't want to be here any more than she did, but after the evidence team set to work in the apartment, there wasn't any other place for me to go. Plus, Carver needed support from a female team member. Or so he claimed.
Hospital?
She jerked her arm again, rattling the bed's railing.
Why am I in handcuffs?
See, I guess you must have missed the part where we placed you under arrest on account of you being higher than a kite, I said.
Federal agents, ma'am.
Carver showed his credentials. He probably practiced that in the mirror when no one was around. He reminded her of her rights, and got back to business.
You assaulted an agent. You were positively identified as an accomplice in a robbery. And we found you in possession of narcotics.
And also under the influence, I chimed in. Not to mention the tons of evidence in your apartment. At this point, it's in your best interest to cooperate. Roxy looked flummoxed. She tugged one final time against the restraints, apparently believing if she could get her wrist free, she could escape the hospital after giving Michael and me the slip. But the handcuffs didn't budge.
You don't know anything. You don't have anything on me. It's all lies. You're fucking liars.
Okay. It was morning, and I had been up all night and had no patience for games. Michael, on the other hand, wasn't ready to throw in the towel.
Ms. Henderson?
He paused.
Roxy. May I call you Roxy?
Whatever.
Roxy, you need to be aware of what's going on right now. There was a search warrant issued for your house, your car, and your office. The police and the FBI are tearing through your life to figure out what other ATMs your friends are planning to rob, who your friends are, and what you've done with all of your ill-gotten gains. You were caught red-handed with enough evidence to put you away for the next couple of decades. How do you think your life is going to end up when you are spending the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary?
She shuddered, her defiance weakening.
Liars!
She hissed. We aren't, I said. You know we aren't. You know exactly what was inside your apartment. The man you clocked with that bottle yesterday afternoon, he's our boss. Things aren't looking good for you. Do you have a family? A mother? Father? Anyone? Because the harder you make us work to find the rest of your team, the worse it's going to be for everyone you know. There will be questions. Searches. Tons of embarrassment. Maybe they're involved. Maybe they're helping you or covering for you. Who knows? Maybe we'll bring them up on accessory charges or interfering in an investigation.
Don't.
She looked miserable, largely due to the low following her high, but maybe a little bit because of the threats.
Tell us something,
Michael insisted.
Anything you say can only help you.
How?
We can speak to the prosecutor, the judge, testify about your helpfulness. I said, maybe you were keeping everything at your apartment for someone else. Maybe we can mitigate your involvement.
The drugs aren't a common thing. Not anymore. I cleaned myself up. I have a job now, a life, but...
She faltered as tears threatened to spill.
It was supposed to be something small and simple. It wasn't supposed to be this.
She took an unsteady breath, and Carver cautioned a glance at me. She would break since she was already broken. I went to the door and dragged the police officer, who was standing watch, inside. We wanted someone else to corroborate her statement. The officer stood in the corner, flipped on a tape recorder, and relayed the pertinent information. Carver informed her we were taping the interview, and she continued her story. She worked as a receptionist at an auto body shop. Every day, she answered phones, made appointments, and filled out work orders and bills. After working there for almost 2 years, she got involved with David Slittle. He was a charismatic, adventure-seeking mechanic. One day, he introduced her to some of his friends, none of which had a name she was willing to share. They talked fast cars and daredevil stunts. She never expected all this talk to turn into anything illegal.
What did you think was going to happen? Carver asked. You're telling me the conversation went from skydiving and bungee jumping to bank robbery?
Not bank robbery. Knocking over vending machines.
So they were knocking over vending machines first? I asked.
I don't know. I guess.
She covered her face with a hand.
I never saw it happen. I thought they were just fooling around. Shooting the shit. You know how guys are.
She peeked at me with one eye, hoping for some support.
Then last week, David calls. He's in a bind, and he needs me to meet him near the pier.
Carver looked about to interrupt, and I put my hand on his forearm, wanting to see what she was going to say first. Derailing her now didn't seem ideal.
I find him and his 2 asshole friends with the fucking ATM. Ripped open. Under a bridge. They get in the car, laughing and congratulating one another. I had no idea.
She moved her hand away and stared wide-eyed at the ceiling.
No freaking idea.
Why didn't you report it? Carver and I asked simultaneously.
How could I? I drove the fucking getaway car. I was an accomplice.
There was no point in arguing about should have, could have, would have, so I waited for her to continue.
Then they said they had another couple of scores mapped out. They knew how to do it now. They could break into the ATMs with no problem. Just get in and out. But they needed a distraction.
Why did you agree? I asked. She looked ashamed.
Because it was more money than I would make in a year.
I didn't see how that was true. ATMs didn't hold that much cash. Either they had a bigger score in mind, or they misrepresented what could be gained from their dumbass thievery.
No one was supposed to get hurt. It was supposed to be simple. The government and the banks have been screwing us over for years. It didn't seem that wrong.
It always annoyed me how people could justify illegal behavior. It was like speeders who were infuriated for getting pulled over for going 10 above the limit, as if that was acceptable, even though it violated the stated law. Tell us what happened, I said.
You know what happened. I go inside the convenience store and talk to the clerk. David's 2 friends go inside to break into the ATM while he waits in the car. But the clerk sees what's going on and comes around the counter. I didn't know he was a cop. You gotta believe me. I didn't know what to do, so I picked up one of the glass soda bottles and hit him over the head. We ran out of there, and that was it.
She looked pensive.
Is that guy okay?
He'll live,
Carver said.
What happened afterward?
David dropped me off at home. I was scared shitless. This wasn't supposed to happen. I had my life back on track. I'm a good person.
Yet another of the things people say that I find irksome.
But I didn't want this life. I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to steal. I just wanted things to go back to normal.
She sniffled and tugged at her wrist again.
But normal's over.
What did you do? I asked, knowing where the story was going.
I had my cut, and David's. All of his notes were in my car. I wanted to burn them, but I was afraid he'd get mad and his friends would do something to me. So I found the only out I ever remembered.
She glanced at her arm.
3 years clean and sober down the drain because of some guy and his friends. That was who I was. Not who I wanted to be. Not anymore. It was all for nothing, wasn't it?
She searched my eyes for an answer, but I didn't have one. She turned to Carver, but he backed away.
Thanks for your help, ma'am. If we have any other questions, we'll be back.
He stepped toward the door.
Wait, what's going to happen to me now?
She asked. We'll do what we can to have your charges reduced. I promised. Until then, you'll remain in police custody, pending a hearing. 7.
Buy you breakfast?
Carver asked. We just finished the paperwork on Roxy Henderson. The evidence from her apartment was being bagged, cataloged, and evaluated as we spoke. Jablonski called to check on our progress. He was on his way to the office, and suggested Carver and I take a couple of hours to get some rest before continuing with our day. Boyle had gotten word on the current situation and took a team to David Slidell's apartment. There wasn't any news on that front, so if we wanted to step out, now might be our only opportunity.
Come on, you've been going non-stop for the last 24 hours. Jablonski will ream you a new one if you don't take a break.
It's not that. I rubbed the grit out of the corner of my eye. I can't determine if I'd rather sleep or eat.
Fair enough.
Carver led me to the elevator.
Go home and get some sleep. You can always grab a sandwich at your desk.
I yawned, perhaps due to his suggestion.
Are you going to stay awake long enough to drive home, Parker?
I thought about it, knowing once I was home, my brain would start churning around Roxy and David. Actually, I changed my mind. Breakfast sounds great, especially if you're buying.
Are you sure?
Absolutely. Added bonus, you can drive. We went to a nearby diner and took a seat at an empty booth. I ordered an espresso and scrambled eggs with toast. Carver went with steak and eggs and black coffee. We stared into nothingness, zombified by the long hours. After our meals arrived and the caffeine kicked in, conversation didn't seem quite as challenging as it previously had.
Do you believe her?
He asked, skewering the last piece of steak with his fork.
Henderson.
He elaborated as he chewed. I don't know. I motioned to the waitress for a refill. Her place didn't match the heroine, but she has priors for possession and B&E. It would make sense why she'd be afraid to call the cops. Who believes a former addict with a rap sheet?
You do.
He finished his coffee and wiped his mouth. Maybe. Maybe not. Some things still don't fit. Everything incriminating was at her apartment. Maps. Blueprints. Schematics. Cash. She could be running the show. I glanced out the window into the bright morning light. There wasn't a single item in that apartment that indicated a man had been there. If it's all her boyfriend's fault, like she insists, why aren't there any pictures of the two of them? There's no razor, extra toothbrush, t-shirt, jacket, whatever. There should be something.
Do you think he removed everything from her apartment in case she got caught? Frankly, she cold-cocked Sam. So, of course, she was going to get caught.
I guess we wait and see what turns up at Slidell's place and take it from there. I took a final sip of my espresso. Do you think they'll scatter now that we have Roxy and David?
They might not know. Or the three men might be together.
Carver dropped some cash on the table and stood up.
Where do you think Jablonski went last night?
Maybe he had a meeting with someone from another agency. He'll tell us if we need to know. Michael gave me a strange look, as if to say,
When did you become so patient?
But the question never formed into actual words because our phones rang. That was never a good sign. Parker, I answered as we went outside to Michael's car. The team was at Slidell's apartment, but there was no sign of our suspect. Either he happened to be out when we came knocking, or he got wind of what happened at Roxy's and took off.
All right, we're on our way,
Carver said, disconnecting his call. We exchanged glances.
No rest for the wicked.
After entering the address into the GPS, we arrived at Slidell's in less than 20 minutes. The tactical team had done a decent job hiding the van, so hopefully, if David returned, we wouldn't spook him. We went upstairs and located apartment 419. The door was ajar, and Carver announced himself as he went in. I followed and glanced around. The place was a mess. Empty bottles were scattered around the room. Papers and maps covered the rumpled, unmade bed in the center of the studio apartment. Any cash or signs of his involvement in the thefts? I asked.
Nothing conclusive yet, but we just started,
one of the other agents said.
Don't you have eyes? Have you seen this place? Any evidence of Roxy Henderson? Carver asked, opening the fridge and checking the contents inside. As he shut the door, he spotted a photo of the two of them in a magnetic frame. Never mind. He tapped the photo with his pointer finger. At least we know they're dating. I wanted nothing more than to start in one corner and search every inch of the apartment. But it wasn't my job. We had a search team to do that. What Michael and I needed to figure out was where David Slidell might be hiding. Pulling on a pair of gloves and trying not to disturb anything more than necessary, I began at one end of the apartment, and Michael began on the other. We worked around the text as we searched for a receipt, appointment book, or calendar, anything that would lead to our suspect. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the apartment, and I cocked my head up. Everyone else heard it too. Michael took point, and resting his hand on the butt of his gun, he approached the door. I came around on the other side to provide cover if necessary.
What are you doing in my apartment?
A voice asked from the hallway.
Mr. Slidell?
Carver kept his gun and badge out of view.
Who are you?
Why don't you come inside? We can discuss this in person.
Carver hoped to get Slidell closer before announcing he was a federal agent in case the man decided to run. They tended to run far more often than they should. Slidell didn't budge, so Carver took his credentials from his jacket pocket.
Federal agent, Mr. Slidell. Don't move.
Of course he moved. In fact, he went running in the opposite direction, back to the staircase.
Shit!
Carver raced out the door with me at his heels. I didn't know if anyone else from the team would assist in the pursuit, or if they'd simply go back to cataloging all the crap in Slidell's apartment. Since Carver and I were the two newest agents, we always had the fun job of chasing down the runners. We were coming up on the second floor landing when Slidell put a hand on the banister and leapt over, landing in a crouch on the ground floor and taking off out the front door. Carver continued pursuit, jumping over the last 4 steps and repeating this process on the final flight of stairs. I ran down the steps as fast as my legs could carry me. Slidell burst out the door and out of sight, followed half a minute later by Carver. When I broke through the front door, I came to a dead stop, searching in all directions for the two men. Catching a glimpse of Michael to my right, I took off in that direction. Slidell zigzagged across traffic in the hopes of losing Michael. I crossed the street, hoping not to be splattered against someone's windshield like a bug. The screech of tires and the blare of a horn made my already pounding heart leap into my throat. The sound wasn't for me, and since Slidell was on the other side of the street, I hoped Michael was okay. After crossing, I glanced down the street to the last location I had seen him. He was still up and running. My attention returned to Slidell, who was clearly a total moron. Not that I was complaining, since he was still running from Michael, but had reversed course and was heading back in my general direction. "Slidell, freeze!" I ordered, but the man kept running. Apparently, he had been a bulldozer in a past life and hurtled toward me. I grabbed the back of his shirt, landing on top of him and bringing him down hard on the pavement with a resounding oomph. He tried to roll me off of him as we struggled on the ground. He wasn't willing to give up without a fight, and I was in no mood to let our suspect get away. As I kneed him hard in the ribs and flipped him onto his stomach, Michael came up behind me.
"You got him?"
he asked. "Just about." I clicked the handcuffs in place and hit Slidell in the kidney on my way up for good measure. The 2 espressos before sprinting through the streets threatened to cause cardiac arrest. "Do you mind dragging his sorry ass back to the apartment building?"
"It'd be my pleasure."
Carver hauled Slidell to his feet. "If you try anything else,
one of us will shoot you,"
he cautioned, a glance at me. I took a few deep breaths and tried to walk off the pounding in my chest. I nodded that I was okay, and we went back to the apartment to turn over another piece of crap. 8.
If you're innocent, why did you run?
Jablonski asked David Slidell. We brought Slidell in for questioning, and despite his protests that he was brutally assaulted, his scrapes and bruises weren't life-threatening.
"Some guys were ransacking my apartment. I didn't want to mess with any psychopaths."
I chuckled, glad to be in the observation room and not an interrogation.
I never realized the federal government employed psychos. I want my lawyer,
Slidell said. Carver came in and handed me my handcuffs.
I disinfected them for you.
Thanks. We watched as Boyle entered the interrogation room to assist Jablonski.
How the hell did you catch up to him? From what I remember, you run like a girl.
Carver teased.
I would have caught him sooner if you weren't in my way,
I quipped. But he did backtrack, so it wasn't too hard to get him on the ground. Although, it might have been easier had we not just finished breakfast.
Do you want to watch the interrogation? Or do you want to see what was uncovered at his apartment?
I considered the question, and decided to see what we found instead of listening to Slidell whine and bitch about how his rights were violated. Plus, it would be an hour before his lawyer got here, which meant the questioning was over until then. Trailing Michael back to his desk, I saw the files and photographs spread out for our perusal. It looked like a much weaker version of the evidence we found in Roxy's apartment. There was maybe a grand in 20s that had been recovered from under the mattress and a layout of Mutual One. At least she had been on the level about something. Any idea who the other two chuckleheads are? I skimmed the official report and evidence list.
No idea. But we're getting a subpoena for Slidell and Henderson's phone records. Maybe we'll figure it out. They must have been in contact, right?
Sure. I went to my desk and found the aspirin in my top drawer. Popping two and swallowing, I shut my eyes and tried to think. I had a headache and was running on fumes. Sleep would have been the better choice instead of breakfast. Too late now. Has anyone pulled employee records for the auto body shop? If Roxy and David work there, maybe the other two goons do too. Or maybe someone there will remember seeing them.
Here.
Carver pulled out a sheet of paper and read the names on the page.
I'm not sure if we've run backgrounds on any of them yet.
He scanned the rest of the forms on his desk, looking for a note, but came up empty.
Do you think they have previous records?
What do you think? I asked.
Mr. Upstanding Citizen doesn't just decide to steal a fucking ATM on a whim.
Probably not. Split the list with me. He wrote down half the names on a separate sheet of paper, and we got to work. While we were running the names through the law enforcement databases, looking for previous records, particularly ones involving burglary or larceny, Jablonski appeared near my desk.
Parker, would you like to explain how Mr. Slidell ended up with bruised ribs and complaints about pissing blood?
He resisted arrest, I said, not bothering to look up. I didn't use excessive force. He had at least 80 pounds and 6 inches on me. Sometimes, my lack of height and weight required creativity to subdue a fleeing suspect, and he pissed me off. The guy barreled right into me. I had to take him down. You always taught us not to let a suspect get away.
Where were you?
Mark asked, turning to Carver.
Trying to get across the street.
We explained the dynamics of the chase to Jablonski.
Good work. It's nice to know the two of you can get things done while I'm gone. No more hand-holding,
he quietly added.
Nicely done.
I suspected he was congratulating himself on his training techniques, so I kept silent, pretending I didn't hear a word he said. We were all suffering from sleep deprivation, so if he needed to self-congratulate himself, it was fine by me. When Carver and I finished our background checks on the list of employees, we didn't get any hits. It was possible the other two thieves lacked a record or used fake names and identities when applying for the job. After all, it was difficult enough finding work without a criminal record. Jablonski had been in and out, revisiting interrogation a few times. Maybe Slidell had given us another lead.
I'll check with Boyle and see if we uncovered anything new,
Carver said.
Can you see if Ms. Henderson has decided to be more forthcoming after getting some sleep?
On it. I picked up the phone and dialed the local police precinct. She was still at the hospital under police supervision. After being passed around from department to department, my call was forwarded to the officer who recorded the conversation that morning. Unfortunately, the more Henderson recovered, the less talkative she became. It was timing that had gotten her to speak as freely as she did. With nothing else to do, I put my head on top of my desk and waited for someone to come back with an update.
Parker, go home,
Mark said softly. I opened my eyes and sat up. My neck was stiff, and I wondered how long I had been asleep at my desk. This gave new meaning to the term sleeping on the job.
You helped bring in 2 suspects in the last 24 hours. It's time to go home and get some rest. That's an order.
Sir, I mumbled in protest, rubbing my eyes.
You know I hate being called sir. Just for that, you're going home. Stop by in the morning before you go to the bank. Understood?
Yes. I narrowed my eyes at him. Sir. He waited for me to collect my belongings and go to the elevator before he continued down the hallway. Being asleep and called out on it by my superior was not how I envisioned this day ending, but I was too tired to beat myself up over it. Arriving at home, I locked my door, considered eating or showering, decided against both, and set my alarm for 5 a.m. When the buzzer went off, I considered throwing it against the wall. Nixing that idea, I crawled out of bed, showered, dressed for the bank, and packed a separate bag with regulation attire in the hopes we could simply go and nail the remaining 2 suspects instead. I made it to the OIO building at 6 and spotted Boyle in his office. I knocked on the door, and he gestured for me to enter. Jablonski, Carver, and the other agents from yesterday had gone home. We all deserved a break.
Agent Parker.
He poured a second cup of coffee from his personal machine and placed it in front of me.
Jablonski asked that I brief you on our findings from yesterday.
I just wanted to apologize for... I stared at the floor and added timidly, falling asleep at my desk. He laughed.
You're salaried, not paid by the hour. It's perfectly fine, but you probably don't want to make a habit out of it. Vicious rumors of narcolepsy may spread throughout the office.
He took a sip from his mug.
Point out a single seasoned agent who hasn't fallen asleep at his desk, and I'll show you someone who isn't doing the job properly. Now, let's get down to business. I'd hate to make you late for your backup career.
9. Sam Boyle spent an hour and a half detailing the evidence found in our suspects' apartments. The court order had been issued for Roxy Henderson and David Slidell's phone records, but no identifications had been made on the other 2 team members. After sobering up and recovering from her low, Henderson wasn't willing to give an ounce. She hadn't spoken, except to the medical professionals attending to her. After getting a clean bill of health, she was moved to lock up at the precinct. If we needed her, someone could put in an order for her transfer. But right now, she served no purpose. The local cops would take a crack at her, but I was certain she said all she was going to say. David Slidell had lawyered up. He wasn't talking unless it was to complain about the treatment he received during his arrest. Boyle rolled his eyes at this. No one believed Slidell was brutalized. Frankly, if I slammed his skull into the pavement a few times, I might have even gotten away with that. However, I wasn't in the business of getting my rocks off by knocking around shitheads. So he had some bruises and scrapes. So did I. All part of the job. What am I doing in the meantime? I asked after Boyle, concluding the briefing.
Same thing you've been doing. Keep an eye on the ATM and the bank. I don't know if the ATM bandits are going to ground, or if they'll try to make the final score. So keep your eyes open, and don't get bogged down in the details or descriptions.
He indicated the stitches on the side of his face.
Because it smarts when you do.
Dignity, mostly?
Unfortunately, yes.
He scratched an eyebrow.
We're keeping 2 tactical units on standby in the event anything occurs. But half their team is in custody, so it'd be insane for them to try to distract, break in, and get away by themselves, especially after everything.
Are we any closer to identifying them? What about the tipster? It seemed we had stopped focusing on this mysterious informant. From the limited footage we had, it wasn't Roxy. Maybe it was David. But for an informant, he was highly uncooperative. That left one of the 2 remaining team members or a possible third party.
Hell if I know,
he replied, and I looked at my watch.
Get to work, Parker. If you need anything, We'll be on standby, awaiting your call.
Let's hope I don't need anything. I went to the door. Agent Boyle, if you happen to capture the rest of the thieves before close of business day, feel free to spring me early.
Clearly, you love working at a bank,
He teased.
Hell, Parker, maybe in the future you should consider a full-time position with corporate America.
I'd put a bullet through my brain before that would ever happen.
Hey, you never know.
Another 3 days were spent at the bank. It was Wednesday, hump day, and even though it was the middle of the week, the proverbial hump, it was annoying the way Annette, the teller, so cheerfully announced this. Maybe she just left the employee lounge after humping Ted, the loan officer, because I couldn't figure out why anyone would be this cheery working in a bank. Frankly, it was depressing. We handled other people's money and financial problems, not even our own. Pull it together, Parker. You are not a teller. You are a federal agent. I shook off the boredom and handed the elderly woman the roll of quarters she requested.
Are these old quarters?
She asked. Excuse me?
With the eagles on the back. The way quarters were meant to be.
I stared at her, wanting to reach into my purse, pull out my 9mm, and ask her nicely to step away from the counter.
Miss?
She shook the roll of quarters in front of my face.
Are they old quarters?
It's a mixture. I gave her my best attempt at a smile, hoping I didn't look like a deranged, homicidal clown. It'll be a surprise, just like the toy in a cereal box. She accepted that answer as if it were perfectly logical and walked away. I need a break. I put my face in my hands and tried to shut out the world. We hadn't made any progress identifying the ATM bandits. Jablonski had been trying to negotiate a deal with Slidell to get names in exchange for a reduced sentence. But the problem was we didn't have much on him. The only thing we had was some cash and a layout of the bank. Most of our evidence was against Roxy. She assaulted Boyle, and all the evidence had been lined up and waiting for us in her apartment. Slidell's representation must have realized how weak our case against his client was, because he had been stalling as much as possible. We needed to catch the other two or gather more evidence, which was why I was stuck behind the counter at the bank from hell.
Excuse me, but I don't think you can accurately do your job with your face buried in your hands,
Carver said. What are you doing here, Michael? I brushed my hair back and gazed across the empty lobby. Have you come to free me from this torture?
No.
He grinned, enjoying himself. Annette glanced at us. Alex? Is this your boyfriend?
Honey,
Michael cooed, further irritating me.
You haven't told your coworkers about me yet? Tisk tisk.
He gave Annette his high-wattage smile.
I'm Michael.
Why don't you take a break?
She suggested. It's dead in here anyway. I can cover for you for 10 minutes. Great. Thanks. I grabbed my purse and went around to the opening to get away from the counter.
What are you doing here? Did we get them?
I whispered to Michael, hoping I was free to leave.
No. We're taking another run at Roxy and David, but it doesn't look promising.
This is ridiculous. Are we even positive there were 4 to begin with? Could it have just been 2? Maybe Sam got hit in the head harder than he realized and was seeing double.
Doubtful.
He did a quick visual sweep of the bank, eyeing the ATM, which no one even visited today.
They want to pull the vans off the bank. We might have spooked them. By now, they must know we have half their friends in custody.
Great, I muttered sarcastically.
Look, Boyle and I are positioned across the street, and the vans will be nearby. Just don't panic if you don't see your support parked a block away.
He kissed my cheek, remaining in character.
I'll let you get back to work.
Maybe I should suggest we move the ATM outside. Disconnect the cameras, open the cash door, and leave a note saying, "Free for the taking. Will assist with haul away." It might be the only way to get the rest of the thieves to make their move. After work, I stopped by the OIO and knocked on Jablonski's door. He looked the way I felt. This wasn't working. We were wasting resources and manpower on bringing in 2 suspects for which we had no leads, no description, and no feasible plan. We had to get Slidell or Henderson to give them up, or else we'd never catch them.
We got another tip an hour ago,
Mark said after I finished my tirade. Briefly, I considered he might be lying, but he wasn't into games.
The voice sounded the same. We have teams running traces, looking through footage, doing everything we can.
He shook some thoughts loose in his brain.
Who knows? Anyway, if we're to believe our tipster, the team's been rebuilt, and they're planning something big. He didn't say what it was, but it will be their last job before they disappear for good.
Sounds like our tipster's a nutcase.
He was right the last time. It's all we have to go on, Parker. Boyle and Carver are running this new information by our friends in custody. But until we have something solid, stay where you are.
Are you putting the vans back on the bank?
No.
He frowned, and his forehead creased. I knew Mark well enough to know he thought this was a bad idea.
They'll be close. One is covering the road from the east, and the other on the west. If they do a snatch and grab on the ATM, we'll get them.
Did Carver tell you he and Boyle are staking out the bank from across the street?
Yep. Okay. If we get verification they're hitting the bank, I'll put every spare agent on it. They won't get away again, and if not, then we'll be here, trying to figure out a better plan to get these bastards off the street. They've been making us laughingstocks, and I am no one's laughingstock.
They'd pissed off Boyle, and now Jablonski. Whoever they were going down. 10. It was getting close to 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon. I stifled my yawn and reached for the deposit slip. The man I was helping smiled brightly and asked for my phone number as I printed his receipt and slid it to him. Thanks, but I'm already spoken for. The security guard had just locked the entrance, hoping to deter any last-minute customers from coming inside the bank. A few people went to the exit as the man stood before me, not willing to take no for an answer.
Here.
He looked behind his shoulder, and something caused the hair on the back of my neck to stand at attention.
Let me give you mine instead.
He turned his receipt over and scribbled something on the back. Looking down, I knew what it was going to say.
Don't make a scene,
he warned. Of course not, sir. I remained calm and detached as I hoped everyone else would leave the bank before things went from bad to worse. The instructions were simple. He wanted an escort to the vault, and if I failed to comply, he'd shoot up the place. My phone was on the counter, and I needed it to get word to the team outside.
All right.
He jerked his head to the side.
Get moving, and if you push the panic button, I'll kill you.
I'd like to see you try, I thought as I moved deliberately slow, giving as many customers enough time to get out of the bank as possible. The fewer possible casualties, the better. I scanned the room, trying to identify the rest of the bank robbers or determine if there were any other bank robbers, placing one hand on top of my phone, which was just out of his line of sight. I slipped it into my blazer pocket. As soon as I got the chance, I'd speed dial Carver. Hopefully, it wouldn't be enough to tip off the thief. Okay, there's no reason anyone needs to get hurt here. But you must know, I don't have access. I'm just a teller, I said quietly. 2 men stood near the back wall, and from the way their jackets hung on their bodies, and their faces were obscured by sunglasses and caps, I knew they were here for the robbery. You don't want to draw attention to yourself. Let's not alert anyone else. Okay? If he thought it was strange I was offering helpful hints on conducting a heist, he didn't let on.
Hurry up.
Opening the latch, I went around the counter, my eyes never leaving him. He wasn't disguised or trying to conceal his identity, which either meant he was cocky enough to believe he'd get away without incident, or he was willing to kill anyone who got in the way. By my calculations, those weren't good odds.
Alex, what are you doing?
Annette asked, causing him to turn toward her. I saw the gun on his hip, just underneath his shirt, and knew things could get bloody any second. Nothing, It's almost closing time. I just need a moment alone with my friend. Finish with your customer and call it a night. I'll close up," I said as nonchalantly as possible. She continued to look at us questioningly, but I continued toward the staircase, urging the bank robber along. As we began our ascent, I noticed him signal to the other two, who had remained off to the side near the empty couches and closed loan offices. Thankfully, the loan department had gone home for the night, and there were only 3 tellers, the security guard, and the bank manager still in the building, in addition to a few straggling customers. Containing the situation was the best I could hope for. If the 3 or 4 customers in line would just finish their business and leave, it would make this entire situation easier for everyone involved.
"You've done this before?"
The man asked as we made it to the top of the steps.
"No one remains this calm."
"You are just like a fucking mugger. If I cooperate, you'll take what you want and go." I tried to sound frightened and angry, but I was weighing my options concerning the chances of attempting to subdue him. The only problem was the 2 goons downstairs. I needed backup in the form of tactical support.
"Smart girl.
He stared with dead eyes and removed the gun from his hip.
Now take me to the safe deposit boxes."
Apparently, he was smart enough to realize breaking into the vault would be too time-consuming and obvious. At least with safe deposit boxes, there was no way of knowing what went missing. There were no surveillance cameras in the room, and the locks were simpler to break, even if there were 2 per box. Someone had done their homework.
"Move."
He raised the gun and maintained a steady aim as I led him to the other staircase and descended the steps. "It's right here." I opened the door and swallowed, leaning against the opposite wall and trying to make myself small and less intimidating. Not that he was intimidated by my barely 5'6" physique.
"No. You'll make a run for it. Get inside."
I obeyed, and he shut the door.
"Don't try anything."
He jerked the gun, indicating I should take a seat. I slid to the floor, and as he began searching for a specific box or set of boxes, I felt the number pad on my phone. Pressing the 2 and the call button, I hoped Carver would answer. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, hoping Michael could hear me. "Robbing a bank is a great way to ensure you'll spend the next 20 years in prison. What about your 2 friends in the lobby? They have automatic weapons, don't they? Are you planning to mow us all down after you get what you want?"
"Shut up, bitch."
he growled, prying open one of the boxes. "Or do you think because you're just hitting the safe deposit boxes, no one will ever know?"
"I said shut it."
He kicked the table in the middle of the room toward me as a threatening gesture. "It's an excellent plan, except for the fact I can identify you. At least your friends have caps and sunglasses on." That was everything I knew about the situation, and all the information I could relay to Carver. It was up to him now.
"I swear to God, if you make one more sound, I will blow your fucking brains out."
He dropped what he was doing and towered over me, pressing the muzzle of his gun against my forehead.
"Not a goddamn peep."
I stared up at him, not afraid.
Bang.
He taunted, but I didn't flinch. Now probably wasn't the best time to inform him he was under arrest, considering the fact my gun was still behind the counter in my purse. After a moment, he stepped away and slipped the gun back on his hip as he continued to pry open and ransack the boxes. I had to give him credit. He had a talent for getting them open in record time. I glanced around the room for a possible weapon. The only thing I spotted was the metal letter opener he was using to jimmy the boxes. He placed it on the table as he dumped the contents of the current box into the drawstring bag he brought with him. I snatched it from the table in one quick motion. Luckily, he didn't notice it was gone or that I moved from my spot. The sound of gunfire erupted from the lobby, and he stopped. Straining to hear, I heard someone announce, "Federal agents!" Then more shots were exchanged. Those words caused the bank robber to become frenzied. He dumped the rest of the box into the bag, pulled the string closed, and slipped it underneath his jacket.
"You are going to get me out of here,"
he said.
"Is there a back door or another exit?"
Nope. Like I was going to tell him about the second entryway from the manager's office.
"Well, we're going to find one."
He pulled his gun and grabbed my arm, hauling me to my feet.
"After you."
The gunfire stopped, and my guess was his two partners had been subdued. We were in the hallway when Michael came down the steps directly in front of us. His gun was out and aimed. The gunman grabbed my hair and pulled me against him, using my body as a shield. He pressed his gun into my clavicle.
Federal agent! Drop your weapon and let the lady go, Carver ordered.
I met Michael's eyes, hoping he'd just take the shot anyway.
Drop it,
he repeated. The gunman pulled me closer, and I reached into my pocket, grasping the handle of the letter opener. It was better than nothing.
I'm going out that door.
The guy dragged me backward toward the locked vault. The problem was he had nowhere to go in this narrow hallway.
Once I'm free, I'll let her go. Just get me out of this fucking bank.
I can't let you do that. Look around. You're out of options. We can all walk away breathing, but you need to listen to what I say. Now, get on the ground,
Carver said, using his calm, authoritarian voice. He was waiting for a clear shot, and in these tight quarters, I had to do something to give him one. Michael, I interrupted, you don't have a choice. I wanted him to take the shot, but he shook his head ever so slightly. Michael, please. The man pressed the barrel into my neck, threatening to fire.
All right.
Carver took his finger off the trigger and eased his gun down.
Be cool.
The reprieve from having the firearm in his face caused the man to relax his grip just enough for me to elbow him hard in the solar plexus. I stabbed the letter opener into his abdomen, and spinning around, I knocked the gun from his hand. It clattered loudly on the tile floor before he howled in pain, and I attempted to get away. Before I could, he ripped the sharp, metal object from his body and slashed forward. Michael pushed me out of the way and aimed his gun.
Don't you fucking move or I will shoot you.
Picking up the fallen gun, I pointed it at our suspect while we waited for backup to come down the steps. 11.
Guys, we've got 2 more in the lobby with fucking Uzis. They winged sharp,
Boyle said as additional agents came to check on us. 2 agents I recognized led the bank tellers to safety while Carver and I kept tabs on the only remaining bank robber. Because of his stab wound, we weren't able to move him, so we were camped out in the narrow hallway, separated from the lobby. Our bank robber was doing a great job making a nice pool of blood on the floor. Apparently, he didn't know he wasn't supposed to remove an impaled object. The rest of the team was assessing the situation and waiting for the EMTs to arrive. Boyle was running point and giving out instructions. As soon as he got the chance, he came to check on us.
"You kids okay?"
he asked, knowing he just missed something major. "PG." I handed him the robber's gun and ran up the stairs to get my own before someone tried to catalog it as evidence. On my return trip, I noticed the cut on my arm. Damn it. Carver and Boyle glanced at me, and Boyle radioed for the tactical team to cover our captive and make sure he didn't bleed to death while we waited for the EMTs to arrive.
"Alex, are you okay?"
Carver asked as we went into the wide open space of the lobby. Boyle's expression read worry, and Carver picked up on it instantly. "It's just a scratch. Nothing much," I said.
"Blood exposure,"
Boyle added quietly.
"With the way he's bleeding, it's a possibility. You need to get checked out."
The bastard better not have anything communicable, or I'd kill him. That is, if I hadn't already set that in motion. Jablonski arrived, along with a couple of ambulances and the local police department. The FBI would be sending their own agents to evaluate things, but by the time they bothered to show up, I would be gone. Mark found an EMT examining my arm and came over to see what happened. After Carver and I explained the situation in the hallway, Mark ordered me to the hospital and put Carver in charge of babysitting me. Some reward for a job well done. As I sat on a bed in the ER, staring up at the ceiling and wishing to be anywhere but here, I tried to relax. This was all precautionary and a waste of my time. The man who attempted to use me as a human shield was in surgery now. He refused to answer our questions or allow us access to his medical records. Basically, he was being a spoiled brat and trying to ruin my day the way I ruined his. Clearly, his mother never taught him not to play with sharp objects. Since we didn't know what diseases he might have, I was being made into a pincushion. The nurse came in with half a dozen needles filled with high-powered antivirals, antibiotics, and whatever other preventatives they used in the event of exposure to diseases like HIV, AIDS, hepatitis, etc. Grimacing, I looked away as she stuck me multiple times, checked the side of my cut for obvious infection, and said I had to wait before being discharged.
Are you decent?
Carver called from behind the curtain. You know me. Am I ever decent? He pushed the curtain aside.
Are you okay?
I'm annoyed is what I am. This is pointless.
It's just to be on the safe side,
he insisted as I considered leaving without waiting for medical approval. It better be. I'm only 26. Just imagine how much sex I'll miss out on if I end up contracting something from that lunatic.
I'd be willing to take the chance and hook up with you,
he joked. At least, I hoped he was joking.
My guess is you're worth it.
I slapped his arm.
Is that foreplay?
Thanks for not accidentally shooting me. That would have been worse. But if you had the shot...
I didn't. He kept moving behind you. Winging him wouldn't have helped matters. But we made a good team. Where'd you get the letter opener from, anyway?
He brought it to Jimmy open the safe deposit boxes. Apparently, he couldn't keep an eye on his tools. What do we know about him? I asked.
His name is Isaiah Tompkins. He has a few armed robberies in his past. A team is scoping out his apartment and workplace. The other 2 men from the lobby were his former cellmates from 2 different stints. He's a 3-striker now. And considering everything that's happened, the asshole might be better off dead than facing 25 to life.
I nodded, and we fell silent.
Parker,
Jablonski stormed into the tiny cubicle allotted to me.
what did I tell you about having an emergency contact?
I don't need an emergency contact. This is Boyle's fault. That is one paranoid agent you have working for you. First off, we don't even know if I was exposed to anything. And second, we don't know if he has anything deadly or contagious. Carver looked at me, knowing I was slashed with the same letter opener that had been shoved through Tompkins' gut, making my first point moot.
Well, we're going to find out. I will find out.
Mark looked like he was in no mood to be reckoned with. The nurse came back, checked the injection sites, and took my temperature.
Is she okay?
You might experience some flu-like symptoms. It's a common side effect. Headache, dizziness, fever, joint pain, some nausea. I sighed. Medicines and I rarely got along. With the exception of OTC pain relievers, I was a total lightweight. Do you have anyone to keep an eye on you just in case? She asked, speaking directly to me and not Mark, even though he was the one who asked the question.
Of course she does,
he said. Apparently being my emergency contact gave him some kind of authority over me. I'd have to remember to get that changed sooner instead of later. I signed the release forms and stood up. I was probably imagining the queasy feeling. It was the power of suggestion. So I tried using reverse psychology to counteract it.
Carver, take her home. I'll be there as soon as I get some answers.
Guys, I protested. I'm perfectly fine. Can't we just go back to work? But my words fell on deaf ears as Carver led me out of the building. Arriving home at almost 9 p.m., I still wanted to accomplish a lot of things tonight. The first was to shower and change. It was one of the few rituals I had, a coping mechanism to deal with horrible days. Today counted. Can you call in an order for some sandwiches and soup from the deli around the corner? I asked Michael as I grabbed a pair of jeans and a t-shirt from my drawer.
No problem.
He knew my habits.
Take your time.
When I emerged, my head was throbbing and the nausea had set in. I took a seat at my kitchen table, and glanced at the wrapped sandwiches and vat of chicken soup he ordered, along with a stack of individually wrapped saltine crackers. Opening a pack, I nibbled on a cracker as Michael poured a glass of ginger ale and put it on the table in front of me.
You were starting to look a little peaked in the car. Also puce, which isn't a good color on anybody,
he teased. I finished my crackers and got up to get a pen and paper.
Now what are you doing?
Newsflash! We have reports to file and debriefs to go through. I tossed him a questioning look. How long have you been doing this job?
Oh, so that's what you're doing with all those late-night hours in front of the computer at the office.
He slapped his palm against his forehead.
I thought you were surfing for internet porn like everyone else.
He grabbed the pen from my hand.
Tonight, you're not writing a report.
I glared at him, thinking this was his way of telling me to rest. I had no desire to rest. I had a desire to work. Getting a couple injections at the hospital didn't mean there was anything wrong with me.
I'm writing your report tonight, and conducting your debrief.
Michael. I can do it myself.
No. Jablonski gave me strict instructions. Frankly, our boss is scary as hell.
After picking up another pack of crackers and taking a sip of the soda, I told Michael what happened, and he scribbled furiously to keep up. Having a personal assistant was something I could get used to. Now if only he could cook and clean, then maybe he'd be a keeper. 12. By the time Jablonski showed up at my apartment, I was curled up on the couch. Carver finished my paperwork and was putting the final touches on his. Even though he suggested I go to bed, I was exercising my dominion. Here, I was in charge, queen of the castle. What's the verdict? I asked, sitting up. The pounding in my head had increased.
Douchebag's out of surgery. We had a lovely chat. He's undergoing some tests now. It'll be a few hours until we know if he's clean or not.
Mark looked over Carver's shoulder before coming over to the couch and pressing the back of his hand against my forehead.
You can take down a guy twice your size in under a minute. But fill a syringe with antibiotics, and it knocks you on your ass. Crazy world we live in.
Tell me about it.
Mind if I watch the game?
Jablonski asked, sitting on the other end of the couch and picking up the remote as I slumped back down. What game?
The sports channel is showing classic basketball games all week long.
I hated basketball, and he knew it.
I thought since I was hanging around here while we wait for news on Tompkins, I could at least watch some television.
He tossed a glance to Michael.
Carver, why don't you join me and grab the rest of those sandwiches?
I stared at Mark like he was insane.
Would you mind sitting up so there will be room for all three of us?
Fine. I got off the couch and went into my room. The entire point was for me to go to bed. Frankly, I was happy for the excuse to drop the tough act. But there was no reason Jablonski needed to know that. There was also a good chance he already did. Snuggling under the covers, I tried to get warm. Eventually, I dozed as the sound of sports commentary and hushed whispers carried through my apartment and into my bedroom, lulling me to sleep. A couple hours later, I climbed out of bed in search of something to drink. Jablonski was asleep on my couch, snoring slightly. Michael was sitting at my kitchen counter, looking exhausted as he went over the reports. Mark brought a stack with him when he showed up, but I didn't bother to give him a second thought. Why don't you go home? I whispered to Michael. You look beat.
I'm okay.
He searched my face, assessing my condition.
You look better.
Flattery will get you nowhere. I sat down next to him. Mark brought dossiers on the 3 bank robbers. Apparent links connecting Tompkins to Slidell. But as of yet, the 4th man, a getaway driver, hadn't been found. Neither had our tipster. There was a lot of work that still needed to be done to connect these random individuals together. We had several long hours ahead of us. A few hours passed before the phone rang, jilting Mark awake. I grabbed the cordless phone from the cradle and answered. They put a rush on the test results. Even though Tompkins never tested positive for anything, his 2 prison sentences, questionable background, and horrible decision-making abilities made everyone a little uneasy. "Thanks," I said into the receiver, hanging up the phone.
Well,
Jablonski rubbed his face.
what's the verdict?
"He's clean," I said, returning to the paperwork and doing my best to hide the rush of relief. Sometimes, even I didn't know why I tried to act calm and collected all the damn time. I'll probably get tested in 6 months just to make sure, but nothing to worry about, which means I got all those shots for nothing.
Not for nothing.
Jablonski picked up his discarded gun and put his jacket on.
Take the morning off. I'll see you at the OIO building after lunch. We still have more work to do.
He met my eyes.
Especially since you're healthy as a horse.
Sir?
Carver asked, making me giggle. Somehow, he missed the memo on Jablonski's irritation with the word sir.
Fine. You can have the morning off too. Just don't spread it around. I'd hate for everyone to think I'm turning into a sentimental softy.
Mark shifted his gaze from Michael to me.
It's getting late. You should head out and let Parker get some sleep. The reports can wait until tomorrow.
Aw, come on. Just 5 more minutes, I said in a whiny voice, attempting to be jocular. Clearly, I was in a good mood. Jablonski smiled and went to the door. Thanks, Mark, I added sincerely.
No problem.
He nodded once and shut the door.
Wow. You're a total teacher's pet. First, he shows up at your house, and then you get to call him Mark. No wonder you're the favorite,
Michael teased. You're just jealous because he got to crash on the couch, while you had to sit at the counter and work. I put my pen down and leaned back in my chair. There would be no more working tonight. I wanted to celebrate, although quietly, because I still had a lingering headache and chills. He looked at me, and the grin grew on his face.
Your I'm too cool to give a shit facade has some cracks in it. Quick, get the plaster.
He nudged my arm.
I've never seen you this happy before.
Just thinking about all that sex. I snorted.
Is that an invitation?
He tried seductive, but missed the mark after all the kidding around. Absolutely not!
Alex.
He sounded slightly more serious.
Are you a magazine's half empty or magazine's half full kind of girl?
As in the bullets in my gun?
Uh-huh.
I thought about it for a moment. Neither. With half a magazine, I could take down 2 suspects. Possibly 3. He rolled his eyes. What? I asked.
Nothing. I was just trying to determine if you believe you have the worst luck or the best luck. Things tend to work out oddly when we're together on an assignment. But it's you, so you probably don't believe in luck.
I believe in something. No clue what, but definitely something. And right now, I'm willing to say I have some fantastic luck. If you asked earlier when I was getting stuck with needles, I would have told you I had awful luck. It's all about outcomes and perspective, isn't it?
It is.
He squinted, trying to hide the smirk.
You're either the most put-together person I know, or the most insane.
He shook his head.
Things are a lot more interesting here than they were in Los Angeles.
He got up and stacked the folders on top of my table. Are you glad you transferred?
Yeah. And after a day like today, I'm going to ask to stay at the OIO. That is, if you're not going to add my lack of firing on Tompkins as another tally against me, even though I didn't have a clear shot.
It only counts against you if I get shot, or have to shoot someone for you. That happened once before, and there was no need for a repeat performance. Before you go, would you mind telling me what happened in the bank? My viewpoint on the matter is limited, and it'd be nice to be prepared for tomorrow. I glanced at the time. Later today, I corrected. 13. Michael Carver was one hell of a storyteller. I never knew this until he began explaining in vivid detail what happened outside the bank, during the breach, and in subduing the other 2 robbers. His words had me enthralled as my mind created the situation he was explaining. Either that, or the nurse forgot to mention hallucinations and delusions as possible side effects.
Boyle and I were staked out across the street, drinking our coffee and waiting for everyone to clear out of the bank. The security guard locked the front entrance, and a few people were straggling out the exit. Frankly, we figured it was time to call it a day. And Boyle was just about to send the tactical units home. But I spotted you through the window, going upstairs with some guy in tow.
And you didn't assume it was a customer or a booty call? I quipped.
No. You take your job too seriously for shenanigans, and something just didn't fit the bill. So we waited. A few minutes later, my phone rings. Keep in mind, by this point, another 3 people have left the bank. And with the way the damn windows are, we aren't certain how many people are still inside.
I'm glad you answered.
Ha ha! I put the call on speaker, and at first, all we hear is static and fabric rustling around. Boyle's thinking you pocket-dialed me accidentally, but then your voice comes through, explaining the situation.
He shook his head, almost in disbelief.
You gave us the description, the number of suspects, their location, everything. It was fucking genius. I leave the line open while Boyle calls in our tactical support. Things sound a bit heated, and I decide to go in.
You decide to go in?
Boyle and I decide to go in.
He raised an eyebrow as if to ask if I was happy with the correction, but I remained silent.
The TAC team is on the way, so we go in the exit, trying not to make a scene. As we walk in, the security guard tells us the bank is closed, and the 2 thieves make us. They were carrying fucking Uzis. Who carries an Uzi? We're not in some noir gangster flick.
Did they say, your money or your life? I asked,
but Carver wasn't amused by my question. Mr. Big Shot Security darts out the door, so I'm guessing he's probably not cut out for security work.
You're great at reading people. I winked.
The 3 tellers are still behind the counter, and one of them starts screaming like a banshee and hits the silent alarm, which notified the manager. What's his name?
Sharp?
As in he isn't very... Michael sighed, probably to add to the theatrics and drama. He comes out of his office. One of the 2 gunmen decides to spray the place in bullets. Boyle and I duck behind the furniture, and Sharp gets winged. It's nothing serious. A flesh wound to the upper arm. But he's howling like a werewolf during a full moon. We made the announcement and told the bastards to drop their guns.
Did they comply? I knew they wouldn't. No one that well armed ever does.
Fuck no. Boyle gets to Sharp, and I'm considering taking one of them out when our tactical team bursts through the doors. The sons of bitches flip out because of the dozen agents in full assault gear. The one who shot Sharp tried to make a run for it, but he got hit by a beanbag round. The other one was on the ground without any of us even having to ask.
Accommodating.
Hardly. Carver rolled his eyes. They secured the main room, and that's when I went up the stairs so I could go down the stairs to get to you. Has anyone else considered how moronic it is to have only one way to get to the vault and safe deposit boxes? Asinine to go up and then down.
There's a back doorway from the manager's office, I added. It opened up into the safe deposit box room. And it was how actual clients got access to their property. The bank robber who attempted to take me hostage didn't know this. No one did. And I didn't offer to divulge this piece of information. It was need to know. And the dirtbag definitely didn't need to know. It's a security measure to deter thieves, robbers, and gunmen from knocking over the bank.
Obviously, it works like a charm,
he muttered sarcastically. He met my eyes, wondering if he should continue the story since I knew the rest.
Then I come down the steps, and I'm confronted by you and the idiot with the gun.
Fun times.
Yep.
Just for the record, was I supposed to swoon and say something like, my hero? Because there was a class taught at Quantico on how to not swoon in the face of danger.
Ha! Ha ha! It's okay. I knew you were thinking it the entire time.
He stood up, getting ready to leave my apartment.
Honestly.
His tone was serious, but whatever he was going to say, he decided against. Instead, he pressed his lips together and went to my door.
Good night, Alex.
That weekend, we went through all the information we had on our 5 currently incarcerated thieves. Most of them had records, but only Slidell and Henderson worked at the auto body shop. The local police department moved them to central booking and kept them segregated. Jablonski and Boyle dragged each of them to the OIO building, one by one, for questioning. The 2 Uzi-toting robbers, Robert Dunn and John Black, were hired for the job by Isaiah Tompkins. They were last-minute replacements for Slidell and Henderson and had no previous knowledge of the ATM heists. They were only involved because of their connection to Tompkins, whose record indicated he met both Dunn and Black while in prison. They each had a laundry list of misdemeanors and felonies on their rap sheets, which didn't seem surprising given their artillery of choice. Other than being promised a percentage of the bank cut, they knew very little of what was going on. A job was a job. No questions asked. The more interesting connection was figuring out who comprised the original 4-man team, or 3-man and 1-woman team. Roxy Henderson was romantically involved with David Slidell. They met at work, and at some point, the clothes had come off. The strange thing was instead of having a natural progression to their relationship, they went from romance to robbery. It made no sense to me. Maybe it's why dating anyone you work with was so strongly cautioned against. 1 minute, you're in love, and the next, you are taking a bank teller hostage, or driving a getaway car. Still, it would be nice to believe normal people existed and didn't one day wake up with the unshakable desire to become felons. For whatever reason, Roxy went along with David's plan or his friends, since we were still uncertain who the ringleader in all of this was. She wasn't going to narc on her boyfriend, and even now, she remained adamantly opposed to giving us any more information. David Slidell claimed I used unnecessary force, and there was no legal basis for the warrant issued to search his apartment. Due to the lack of evidence we found inside, he maintained he was innocent, and this was a frame-up. None of those things were true, but his lack of cooperation was frustrating. Jablonski and Boyle questioned him numerous times, but they might as well slam their heads into the wall. Maybe David's instead, but that would be deemed brutality and a violation of his civil rights. There was only one source left for us to exploit, and right now, he was still recovering from surgery. Whatever Mark did to ensure our access to Tompkins' medical records made Mr. Tompkins particularly cooperative, but due to his unstable condition, the doctors limited our contact with him. Aside from the 24-hour police detail posted outside his room, we were stuck waiting until he was no longer in the ICU before we could question him further. I just hoped he'd be able to give us answers and not more questions. 14.
No,
Jablonski said. Thankfully, we were in his office, away from the prying eyes of my fellow agents.
you're not going to question Tompkins. In fact, that's an order, Parker.
What do you think I'm going to do? I'm not going to stab him again.
No.
Mark stood up and leaned across his desk.
Now, get back to work.
Yes, sir, I said through gritted teeth. It was Monday morning, and he was sending Boyle to talk to Tompkins. While I understood the need not to further agitate our one remaining chance at closing this case, from a creative standpoint, any threat I made would carry much more weight. Just the thought of Tompkins had my skin crawling. It had been 3 days since the situation at the bank, but instead of being relieved, I was angry. If anyone should get to throw accusations at the bastard, it should be me. Cool it, Parker, I reminded myself. Taking a few deep breaths and making sure logical thinking had returned, ushering out all my emotional turmoil, I pulled out the dossiers we compiled on Dunn, Black, Tompkins, Slidell, and Henderson. We had their phone records, and although they were primarily used to determine the interconnectedness of our 5 detainees, we didn't get the chance to thoroughly examine all the numbers listed. Someone had to do it, so it might as well be me. After cross-referencing common numbers among the 5 different phone logs, accessing the billing information for the unknown numbers, and making a list of commonalities, I had a few possible leads on our getaway driver and tipster. There was a slim chance they were one and the same. Honestly, It didn't matter either way. The tipster hadn't done anything illegal. All he did was report the crimes. It was just the fact he knew such intimate details that led us to believe he was involved or closely related to someone who was. Putting things into perspective, I began narrowing our possibilities. Hours later, we assembled in the conference room to go over our findings. I made some progress on identifying the fourth man, and our technical savvy brethren were comparing driver's license photos to the grainy security cam footage from outside the bank and convenience store in the hopes of finding a match. Boyle returned from his outing with some additional information, so the four of us took turns catching the rest of the team up to speed. After reading the dozen possible names off my sheet of paper, Boyle perked up. One name, in particular, Garrett Neville, brought a smile to his face. Glancing at Carver, who had been sent to interview Roxy again, he let out a snicker. Jablonski and I seemed to be the only two in the dark.
Garrett Neville, Carver flipped through his notes, is a nice guy. Quiet. Was always hanging out at David Slidell's place. Playing video games. And drinking beer. Always kept to himself. He was the outcast of their group. But he never caused any problems, so they let him hang around with them.
Unless he's playing GTA. I don't think he's our getaway driver,
Boyle surmised.
He's 22. Enrolled in junior college. Probably the younger brother type. He wants to fit in but doesn't. He used to work part-time at the auto body shop until he quit. That's when they hired Roxy Henderson to replace him. If anyone knows what's going on with Slidell, he would.
Jablonski tossed a glance my way.
Parker, why don't you have a friendly chat with Neville? I'm sure he's not used to beautiful women talking to him. Maybe you can turn on the charm and get him to open up.
On it, I replied. Carver gave me an encouraging look, and I copied Neville's address before exiting the conference room. I knocked on Neville's door. The apartment building he lived in was populated by co-eds, and the hallways were filled with loud, boisterous, and drunk young adults. Sometimes I was nostalgic for my college years, but this was a great reminder to be thankful that was in the past.
Hang on.
A voice called from the other side of the door.
I just need to find my wallet.
Mr. Neville, I said, about to announce I was a federal agent. But instead, he opened the door wide, holding out a stack of dollars, and clearly surprised to find me standing in front of him. I'm not a prostitute. I'm a federal agent. I flashed my badge as he turned crimson.
So sorry.
He stuttered.
I thought you were pizza.
He stepped back.
Not pizza, but bringing pizza. Come inside, please.
He gestured that I should enter. Stepping into his apartment, I made sure no one else was present. There were no obvious signs of drugs, stolen cash, or weapons, with the exception of the lightsabers hanging on the wall. Since I wasn't a Sith Lord, I wasn't too worried about their implications.
What can I do for you? Agent?
Alex. I gave him a coy smile. Your name has surfaced in conjunction with an ongoing investigation. It was apparent from watching him that he knew exactly what was going on. This will go much better if you elaborate before I have to start asking questions.
How'd you know it was me?
His Adam apple bobbed uncontrollably as he swallowed repeatedly. We're the federal government. Big Brother is always watching. From the science fiction memorabilia around the room, I was positive he bought into conspiracy theories too. I snickered and cracked a smile. Relax. Why don't you sit down and tell me what you know?
Are they watching me right now? Is that what the drones are for?
It would be too easy to toy with him, so I shook my head. I was only kidding. There were a lot of long hours, phone records, and basic investigation tactics that led us to you. Now, my tone grew stern. We can do this here, or I can bring you in. Which would you prefer? I flipped my hair behind my ear and tried the smile again. Apparently, he was mesmerized by my charm or afraid of the drones lurking outside his window, because he quickly became an open book.
I didn't go with them. They never asked me to, but they talked about it all the time. Finding better ways to make money. Easier ways. A few months ago, I was tinkering with a computer, and Dave asked if I could show him how it worked. Then we got talking about how everything is computerized now, And wouldn't it be great if you could hack an ATM?
He looked up, flustered.
Not that I ever would.
Of course not.
But yeah, that's when it started. He tried to make sure I didn't know what was going on, but I overheard a lot.
After listening to everything Neville said, I phoned Jablonski for advice on what to do now. Neville was a material witness. He knew the connections among the players and the identity of the getaway driver. We couldn't leave him here, especially if someone else realized what he knew. At the same time, it would be a tough sell to get the kid to willingly go into protective custody, at least for the short term.
I'll send Carver to meet you. He has some visual aids that might help your dilemma.
15. Michael and I convinced Neville to come with us and to provide invaluable testimony on the ATM thefts. The failed bank robbery was being prosecuted separately since it relied too heavily on a separate team, despite the fact it had been David Slidell's plan. Slidell would be brought up on conspiracy to commit charges in conjunction with the bank robbery, but the heavier penalties for him lay with the ATM thefts. The bank robbery case practically made itself, since 3 of the 4 team members had been caught red-handed and in possession of firearms. They were all going away for a long time. That allowed our focus to shift back to the initial case, the ATM heists. The only common denominators present at both the bank holdup and the heists were the getaway driver, John Seymour, and Isaiah Tompkins. Both men would be charged to the fullest extent on the ATM case and the bank robbery. Neville told us everything he could. He was our tipster. He didn't think robbing anyone, even banks, was a reputable way to make money. At least someone had ethical standards and a conscience. His tips might have put him in danger had Seymour been concerned with being sought after. But he wasn't. Being the getaway driver during the bank robbery, he just wanted a cut without as much risk. Fortunately for him, we were willing to deal if he cooperated. David Slidell masterminded the plan with the help of his girlfriend, Roxy. The 2 of them found maps, blueprints, and schematics for the ATMs. From the information we found in Roxy's apartment, I was willing to wager she was the brains and David was the bronze, despite the fact she had accused him of all of it. Upon a second search of her apartment, this time for drugs, we found a false wall in her closet where she kept her stash. There were dozens of empty prescription pill bottles, and we believed she spent her money on pharmaceutical-grade narcotics and needed more cash to refill her supply. David had the connections and the muscle to pull this off. He had questionable friends, namely Isaiah Tompkins. Slidell used his friends as additional support during the ATM snatch and grab and the convenience store hit. His team consisted of his friends, Isaiah Tompkins, John Seymour, and Roxy Henderson. Tompkins and Seymour met Slidell while getting their cars repaired years ago, and they had been close ever since. Seymour had no prior record, but was willing to go along with everyone else. He was a follower, and Slidell had been the leader, or at least believed he was. Roxy encouraged him, even though she denied this fact vehemently. The skeletons in her closet said otherwise. And while Tompkins might have boasted about being reformed, the statistics said differently. Repeat offenders continue to offend repeatedly. After Roxy and Slidell got pinched, Tompkins wasn't willing to let the perfect plan go to waste. So he called in his 2 former acquaintances, Dunn and Black. The 2 had some B&Es and larceny charges, but neither was a criminal genius. They were simply continuing to do the only thing they knew how to do, steal things. This time they got caught. The Uzis they brought into the bank were provided to them by Tompkins, who by all accounts was the only actual hardened criminal in the bunch. The rest seemed to be wayward misfits, pursuing their own personal agendas. A drug addict, an auto mechanic, a dumb schlub, 1 hardened criminal, and 2 lackeys walk into a bank, Carver said. Want to hear the punchline? The punchline is we got them. Precisely. He pulled up a chair and sat across from me, putting his feet on the edge of my desk. May I take you out to celebrate, Agent Parker? I shook my head. I'm not in the mood. That's why we are going to drink, to put you in the mood. Logging off my computer and putting my report in the top drawer for tomorrow, I leaned back in my chair and assessed Michael. It's getting easier, isn't it? What? This job. The work is still daunting, but I frowned. It's not like I'm surprised to find out Henderson lied to us, or Tompkins was so desperate to get away that he'd rip a letter opener out of his stomach to use as a weapon. I maneuvered through my muddled thoughts. Easier isn't the right word, but I'm not sure what is. Maybe it's just me being cynical and jaded. You've always been cynical and jaded. You've got that agent prerogative. You always did. He stood up. And now, we're going to do what everyone else does to cope. Fine. I gave in. But you're buying the first round. This has been Agent Prerogative, written by g.k.parks. Narrated by Amber Hinson. Copyright 2014 by g.k.parks. Production copyright by g.k.parks.